I saw a guy at a luncheon giving a speech, and he was that nervous. I mean, he was spilling water all over himself.
Most of us are unaware that even celebrities sometimes have a terrifying childhood and struggles growing up. And the same happened with Don Knotts, who had an awful upbringing that's rarely talked about. So, in this video, let's delve deep into the life of this beloved comedian and discover the harsh reality he endured as a child. Here we begin. Don Knotts, best known as Deputy Sheriff Barney Fife from The Andy Griffith Show, was a true national treasure. The show was a glimpse into times when neighbors helped each other, and a one-bullet policeman was enough. While Barney Fife is his most famous role, his career included Three's Company and movies like The Ghost and Mr. Chicken. Despite his comedy, Knotts' life held deep sadness and tragedy. Born in 1924 in West Virginia, Knotts had a difficult childhood. He was born late into his family and slept in the kitchen, unlike his brothers, who shared a room with a boarder. His father, Jesse Sr., was bedridden and struggled with schizophrenia, alcoholism, and hysterical blindness. Knotts faced abuse during childhood, and he recalled his father threatening him with a knife. To go anywhere in the house, he had to walk past his father, who spent most of his time on the living room sofa. Young Don often got sick, and his difficult upbringing left him pale and thin. He once said, "I did not come into the world with much promise." Not only that, he even had a tough relationship with his brothers. Author Daniel DeVise, Knotts' brother-in-law, described their complicated relationship, saying that his brothers, William Earl, known as Shadow, and Sid, had a difficult life and often fought. Tragically, Shadow passed away from an asthma attack when Knotts was just a teenager. Growing up in such an environment was hard. Even his brothers mistreated him. They often fought and had their struggles. With fear at home, Knotts sought happiness through imaginary characters. He created these characters and acted out in happy stories to cope with his difficult life. However, his life started to improve in his teenage years. When his father passed away when he was 13, the burden lifted. He became old enough to control the other brother and was no longer terrorized at home. In high school, he blossomed as a class president, wrote a yearbook column, became popular, and even had his first best friend. But he once admitted that he felt like a loser and was unhappy for most of his early life, partly due to their family's poverty and his own insecurities. During his early teens, Don Knotts found a unique friend, Danny, who was a ventriloquist's dummy. And with this dummy, Don marked the beginning of his performing career. Moreover, Don Knotts faced a cruel rumor about being a strict Marine Corps drill instructor, which was entirely false. He never served in that role, and this rumor is just one of the many about unlikely celebrities having a hidden military past. What's true is his actual military service during World War II. Despite being undernourished and considered unlikely for military service, he was accepted. Entertaining the troops, he toured the Pacific Front with the comedy troupe Stars and Gripes. He even worked as a nurse when needed. What's next? Well, before we continue with Don Knotts' story, if you are enjoying the video, subscribe to our channel to never miss out on more such contents. Moving on, during his time in the military, Don Knotts, who was still performing with his ventriloquist's dummy, Danny, caught the attention of another comedian, Red Ford. Ford's words stayed with him when he said, "You know something? You're a funny little son of a bee." But by the time he left the military, he had moved on from ventriloquism and even threw Danny off a ship in the South Pacific. After his military service and graduating from West Virginia University in 1948, Knotts went to New York City with only $100 in his pocket. Like many aspiring actors, he faced rejection. He was turned down for radio gigs, but eventually landed a role in a soap opera. Getting his big break on Broadway took 7 years of hard work. He starred in a comedy called No Time for Sergeants, alongside Andy Griffith, who would become a lifelong friend. Later, he became known for playing a particular type of character, nervous, anxious, and non-threatening. He was remarkably good at it, and the New York Times even noted that he borrowed some material for his act. Interestingly, the comedians and actors he borrowed from didn't mind. Why? Because his unique talent made everyone he worked with look more manly. Despite his small and thin stature, Knotts had a special knack for making his co-stars appear closer to leading men. Even after finding success in the world of entertainment and becoming a beloved television figure, Don Knotts struggled with deep-seated issues. He had long battled feelings of inferiority, anxiety, hypochondria, and chronic insomnia. These issues were so severe that before performances, he would spend days in bed, and he had even become addicted to anti-anxiety drugs prescribed by his doctors. A pivotal moment came when he accidentally overdosed on sleeping pills. Coupled with an ultimatum from his third wife, this overdose prompted Knotts to change his life significantly. He quit his bad habits, but these struggles continued to affect him as he tried to reconcile his on-screen persona with his real-life success. Knotts turned to therapy for help. His daughter, Karen, described him as mercurial, fighting depression and undergoing various mood swings. However, she noted his resilience and how he ultimately overcame his challenges, becoming a genuinely happy person who loved people. Despite his remarkable talents and success on The Andy Griffith Show, Don Knotts left the series after 5 seasons. While some attribute his departure to the demanding nature of television work, he had always intended to do only 5 seasons. After leaving the show, he aimed to focus on making movies. Still, he didn't receive the critical acclaim he had expected for films like The Incredible Mr. Limpet, The Reluctant Astronaut, and The Ghost and Mr. Chicken. Later in life, Knotts faced the devastating diagnosis of macular degeneration, which interferes with one's central vision and can lead to blindness. This diagnosis hit him hard, causing depression. Still, he maintained his resilience, continuing to work and enjoy his favorite hobby, swimming laps, until his eyesight deteriorated to the point that he could no longer drive or read. After leaving The Andy Griffith Show, Don Knotts had his own variety show, The Don Knotts Show, which premiered in 1970. On the surface, it appeared to have all the elements of a hit, but didn't live up to expectations. The show aired on NBC and faced stiff competition during a season filled with variety shows. Don Knotts explained, "We did all kinds of things. There was a tremendous competition that season for variety because everybody and his brother had a variety show. After leaving CBS, the show's debut on NBC didn't sit well with everyone. Despite high hopes, it failed to gain traction. More efforts were made to salvage the show, with The Andy Griffith Show director Bob Sweeney brought in to assist. Gary Berghoff was added as a recurring sketch comedy character, and they introduced acts like The Carpenters. Despite these attempts, the show was cancelled prematurely, and Don Knotts continued appearing on other variety shows. And in the early 2000s, Don Knotts was diagnosed with lung cancer. Despite growing apart, his old friend Andy Griffith rushed to support him during his battle. Matlock co-star Nancy Stafford described their rekindled friendship as filled with laughter, singing, and jokes as if they had never been apart. Sadly, Knotts lost his fight with cancer and passed away in 2006. His daughter, Karen, later shared her regret about a moment during his last days. She recalled her father's natural humor, even as he was approaching the end of his life. He made her laugh hysterically, and she left his side to share the funny story. Looking back, she wished she had stayed by his side, laughing out loud and allowing him to hear her joy. Don Knotts had quit smoking many years before his diagnosis, and he remained optimistic and positive even when he received the grim news. He didn't inform his children about his chemotherapy treatments, as he was determined to beat cancer and carry on with life, as if it were just a minor setback. Ultimately, his official cause of death was pulmonary and respiratory complications, with previous years marked by unspecified health problems that had caused him to cancel appearances. Don Knotts was remembered by his closest friends as a modest, humble, and intelligent individual who left a lasting impact on those who knew him. Andy Griffith and Ron Howard fondly recalled his kindness and positive nature. So, even though Don Knotts' upbringing was not that great, he made a name for himself in the world. Share your views and AMP, subscribe for more.